The MTR Corporations' real estate profits to be factored into the rail operator's fare adjustment mechanism. Former lawmaker Albert Ho rearrested on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. And in Russia, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin to hold formal talks later today. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Starting in June, the MTR Corporation's real estate profits will be factored into the calculation formula for its fare adjustment mechanism. This means the more the rail operator earns in its property development business, the lower fare increases it will get. But according to current estimates, the MTR may still raise its fares next year.
After half a year of discussions and reviews, the Executive Council and the MTR Corporation have reached a consensus on the final fare adjustment mechanism. Keeping the current formula, the two main factors, transport nominal wage index and inflation, will be retained. The special reduction of 0.6 percentage points will expire this year. The new calculation will add in the profitability factor, which is linked to the rail operator's profit from its property development business. If the company earns less than $5 billion, a special adjustment of 0.6 percentage points will be used. If the profit reaches $10 billion, a 0.8 percentage points. The MTR Corporation's property earnings last year surpassed $14 billion. Applying that to the new formula, the calculation will be using the 0.8 percentage points reduction. The transport nominal wage index for the fourth quarter last year will only be announced by the end of this month. If the third quarter figure is used instead of the fourth quarter figure for the calculation, the MTR will still be able to increase fares by 1.5%.
That percentage will apply to the annual revenue income of MTRCL, which is a big figure. That 0.2% has an actual effect of reducing the base fare level. So there will be compound effect for the years to come. So the compound effect would be very significant when we talk about, for example, 50 years later on.
Lawmaker Michael Chen, formerly chairman of the Kowloon Canton Railway, thinks that the formula should stop calculating the transport nominal wage index.
They are very tricky. They abide by all the principles and directions that the public wants. But when it comes to detail, they are so stringent on the numbers that effectively the impact is very little in terms of public rail ridership, the cost of riding a rail to work on a monthly basis.
He estimates that even under the new fare adjustment mechanism, the rail operator can still put forward a 2.5% fare increase.
The Hong Kong section of the high-speed rail will fully resume cross-provincial train services from the 1st of April. This will allow passengers to travel directly to mainland cities such as Beijing, Shanghai and Wuhan. Starting next month, passengers will be able to take high-speed trains from West Kowloon to places outside of Guangdong province. With the number of destinations reaching 66, this will bring the daily train frequency from the existing 102 to the pre-pandemic level of 164. Advance tickets will be on sale from March 23rd. Police today rearrested former lawmaker Albert Ho on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. Sources say he's suspected of interfering with the family member of a prosecution witness in the so-called 35-plus primaries case. National Security Police handcuffed Ho and took him away from a housing estate in Tin Hau this morning. He was taken to a police station to help with the investigation. According to sources, he is suspected of interfering with the family member of a prosecution witness. The act allegedly breached his bail conditions in connection with an earlier case involving the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements of China. The bail conditions stipulate that he must not commit any act endangering national security. Ho, together with other Hong Kong Alliance leaders, were charged with inciting subversion of state power under the national security law. President Xi Jinping met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin for informal talks Monday as he began a 3-day state visit to Russia. The two leaders discussed subjects including bilateral ties and the Ukraine crisis. Today, President Xi began the second day of his state visit by meeting with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. Xi is expected to hold a formal session of talks with Putin later today. Dan Orell tells us more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin extended a warm welcome to President Xi for his state visit to Russia and once again congratulated him on his re-election. The two presidents had an in-depth exchange on China-Russia relations and issues of mutual interest, including the conflict in Ukraine. Putin said his country is ready to continue to deepen bilateral cooperation with China. President Xi said both countries see their relationship as a high priority in their overall diplomacy and policy on external affairs. Xi said China and Russia should further deepen practical cooperation in various fields and strengthen coordination on multilateral platforms such as the United Nations. The two sides had an in-depth exchange of views on the Ukraine issue. Xi stressed that most countries support easing tensions and stand for peace talks. He said history shows that conflicts ultimately have to be settled through dialogue and negotiation. The president stated China will continue to play a constructive role in promoting a political settlement to the Ukraine issue. Putin said Russia appreciates China for consistently upholding an impartial, objective and balanced position and standing for fairness and justice on major international issues. He stated Russia has carefully studied China's position paper on the political settlement of the Ukraine issue and is open to peace talks, adding that Moscow welcomes Beijing to play a constructive role in this regard. At the start of the second day of his state visit, President Xi met with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin at the House of the Government of the Russian Federation. Mishustin congratulated Xi on his re-election and hailed a new era for Russia-China relations. During the talks, Xi revealed that he had invited Putin to China for the Third Belt and Road Forum. Xi is expected to hold a formal session of talks with Putin later today. Dan Orell, TVB News.
All eyes are now on whether a ceasefire would come out of President Xi's visit to Russia. Ukraine has reiterated its conditions for a truce agreement. Alexei Danilov, a Ukrainian national security official, said any Chinese peace plan must start with the withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory. The U.S. also said any calls for a ceasefire that does not include the removal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory would effectively be supporting the ratification of Russian conquest.
And a ceasefire now, without a durable solution, would allow President Putin to rest and refit his troops, and then restart the war at a time more advantageous to Russia. The world should not be fooled by any tactical move by Russia, supported by China or any other country, to freeze the war on its own terms.
Meanwhile, Washington is authorizing another $350 million in military aid for Ukraine. This as Kyiv builds up its arsenal for an anticipated counteroffensive against Russian forces. Ukraine's defense ministry said on Monday that an explosion in the north of the Crimean Peninsula destroyed cruise missiles intended for use by Russia's Black Sea Fleet. An official of the Russia-installed administration in Crimea said the blast was caused by drones laced with explosives and shrapnel and that the attack targeted civilian sites. Meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is due to visit Kyiv by way of Poland for talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Japanese media showed Kishida boarding a train at a Polish border town. According to the Japanese Foreign Ministry, the Prime Minister will voice support and solidarity with Ukraine. Kishida will also convey his respect for the courage and perseverance of the Ukrainian people standing up to defend their homeland. Japan is slated to host a G7 summit in Hiroshima in May. And Kishida has said that the summit should demonstrate a strong will to uphold international order and the rule of law in response to the Ukraine war. Before flying to Poland en route to Ukraine, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited India, where he met his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi. During his 2-day visit to India, Kishida announced a new plan for an open and free Indo-Pacific. The plan, seen to counter China's influence in the region, includes Japan's support for maritime security, a provision of Coast Guard patrol boats and equipment. Kishida also pledged $75 billion to the region by 2030 through private investments and yen loans, and the ramping up of aid through governmental assistance and grants. He highlighted a loan agreement worth over $2 billion for a high-speed rail project as a flagship project for Japan and India. In Beijing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said China strongly opposes any contact between the United States and the government of Taiwan. He said Beijing had already made stern representations to Washington. The remark was made in response to Taiwan's leader Tsai Ing-wen's plan to transit through New York and Los Angeles as part of a trip to Guatemala and Belize later this month. According to Reuters, U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy intends to meet Tsai during the California leg of her visit, but Taipei would not confirm this. Tsai's meeting with McCarthy is seen as a potential alternative to a sensitive visit to Taiwan by the Republican House Speaker, a trip he said he hopes to make. A top United Nations panel of scientists said humanity still has a chance to prevent the worst of future damage caused by climate change. However, in order to do so, drastic action must be taken now, according to the 6th synthesis report of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The report said emissions must be halved by the mid-2030s if the world is to have any chance of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It also said the world needs to accelerate the transition to green energy and transform agriculture and eating habits if it has any chance of making the necessary cuts in emissions. The report also warned of more extreme weather, rapidly rising sea levels, melting Arctic ice, and the growing likelihood of catastrophic and irreversible tipping points. Following the publication of the report, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that the climate time bomb is ticking, and he urged rich nations to slash emissions sooner. Back locally, the government has proposed to amend the protection of the harbour ordinance to make it easier to conduct small-scale reclamation. The authorities are introducing a policy of non-permanent reclamation works, which will include projects that are not required to meet the criterion of overriding public needs. Mimo Singha reports.
One of the biggest attractions of Hong Kong is Victoria Harbour. When the city was still under British rule, the protection of the harbour ordinance was introduced, limiting land reclamation in the waters of Victoria Harbour. Some court rulings also stated that reclamation of the harbour is not permitted unless there is evidence of an overriding public need. However, the government considers the approval process as complicated and cumbersome, as the ordinance sets out a high threshold that covers all harbour reclamation projects indiscriminately. As a result, this hinders many small harbour improvement projects involving small-scale reclamation with minimal impact on the harbour. Authorities have now proposed some amendments to the existing ordinance. First, they suggested any reclamation areas that are under 0.8 hectares should not be restricted by the ordinance. Such a proposal will apply to 16 harbour improvement projects, including waterfront promenades, cycle tracks, and observation decks. The government also proposed exemption for non-permanent reclamation projects, suggesting they have an upper limit of 3 hectares and a term of 3 years. Authorities said such projects will need to obtain approving exemptions from top officials, such as the Financial Secretary. The Development Bureau said accepting smaller and temporary reclamation projects will allow the public to be closer to the harbour via new facilities, including boardwalks. The legislative amendments are expected to be submitted to LegCo in the first half of next year. Ming Musanai, TVB News.
Art Basel is returning to Hong Kong this year with its largest full-scale event since 2019. The preview starts today and the show will open to the public from Thursday to Saturday. Veronica Lin was at the event.
With the lifting of COVID restrictions, international art events are returning to normalcy, including Art Basel. This year's fair marks Art Basel's largest event since the pandemic began and features 177 galleries from 32 countries and territories. A curated section called Encounters will make its much-anticipated return with 14 presentations. More than 85 speakers will be featured, offering a platform for dynamic dialogue among international artists and curators.
The past 3 years have undoubtedly been a challenging time for all of us. Through this time, we continue to support each other and show up for each other, visiting artist studios, staging exciting shows, striking, challenging and thoughtful conversations about art and creativities. And now we're thrilled to welcome back galleries, patrons, visitors, journalists and reporters from abroad again to celebrate Hong Kong's cultural revival.
Some exhibitors say the fair has attracted more visitors than expected, as the event shines a light on works by local artists.
And I'm so thrilled to see that people are lining up, waiting for the fair to open. Within 15 minutes, the whole fair is full. It's just amazing to see the vibes and the excitement and the energy of the crowd. Especially for Hong Kong artists, we have digital art with generative feature and piano. We have art that is done with erasers, and we have Hong Kong artists from Berlin who created art with tapestry.
Among the works by local artists is an interactive piece called Under Pinestone. Ever thought about turning a classical music masterpiece into a digital artwork? This work is by local artist Henry Chu. Every key generates a different word and pattern, creating a one-of-a-kind interactive artwork. Veronica Lin, TVB News.
And that's the news. Thanks for watching.